Let's explore the concept of sense and reference. These are the two main sources of meaning in language. First, there's reference, which is about how language hooks onto the world around us. It's what allows us to identify specific objects, people, or places when we speak. Think of reference as the actual connection between words and the real-world entities they point to. Then there's sense, which involves the semantic relationships within the vocabulary system itself. Sense is about how words relate to each other, the meanings they carry, and the way they build up our understanding. Now, an important rule here is the reference rule. It states that every meaningful expression has a sense, so it makes sense within the language system. But not every expression has a reference. For example, words like almost, if, and or above, they don't refer to any real-world objects. Instead, they help us structure and qualify our statements without pointing to something specific in the world. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding these two sources helps us see how language functions both as a tool to describe the world and as a system of relationships within itself. Let's talk about the act of reference and the referent. When we refer to something, we're performing a speech act. It's an action we do with our words. This is different from denoting, which is more about the stable property of words. It's what words mean regardless of context. The referent is the actual thing, person, or event in the real world that we pick out with our expression, but this can vary depending on the situation. For example, if I say my left ear, that refers to a different ear for each person, depending on who's speaking. This is what we call variable reference. Most expressions identify different things depending on the context. On the other hand, some expressions have constant reference. These are terms that almost always refer to the same object, no matter who's using them or where. Think of the moon, Angola, or the People's Republic of China. These are pretty stable references across different situations. Understanding this distinction helps us see how language interacts with reality and how context influences what our words point to. It's a core idea in understanding how meaning works in communication, fitting into the bigger picture of how language functions in our social interactions. Let's take a closer look at denotation and extension, which are fundamental concepts in understanding how language relates to the world. Denotation refers to the entire class of objects or situations that a word can correctly refer to. So, when I use a term, its denotation is all the possible things it could mean within its correct context. Extension, on the other hand, is about the complete set of individuals to which a predicate can be truthfully applied. Think of extension as the actual group of things that fit a certain description at a given time. Now, an important point to highlight is the difference in stability between reference and denotation. Reference tends to be a moment-by-moment relationship, meaning it can change depending on the context or situation. Denotation, however, remains stable within the language itself. It's like a fixed boundary that defines what a word can refer to, regardless of specific circumstances. This brings us to the idea of constraints. What an expression denotes acts as a constraint, limiting the acts of reference to particular objects or situations that fit within that denotation. Essentially, the denotation helps us understand what references are valid and keeps our language precise and meaningful within its scope. Connecting this to the bigger picture, understanding denotation and extension helps us see how language maintains consistency and clarity, even as reference shifts in real-world use. It's a critical part of how meaning functions within communication and helps us interpret language more effectively. Let's explore the nature of sense. First, sense can be thought of as the indispensable hardcore of meaning. It's what gives a word or expression its fundamental meaning, independent of the specific context in which it's used. Think of it as the core idea that remains constant, no matter where or how the word is used. Next, we see that the sense of an expression is part of a larger system, what we call linguistic networks. This means that the sense of a word isn't isolated. It's connected to other words through semantic relationships like synonymy, where words have similar meanings, or hyponymy, where one term is a more specific example of a broader category. These networks help us understand how words relate to each other within a language. Moving on, sense is also a mental construct. It's something that a language user grasps when they fully understand what's being communicated. So, sense isn't just an abstract idea, it's something we internalize and recognize mentally when we comprehend language. Finally, I want to highlight the term intention. In logic and philosophy, sense is often referred to as intention. This contrasts with extension, which is about the actual set of things a word applies to. For example, the intention of dog might be a domesticated carnivorous mammal, while the extension is all the actual dogs in the world. By understanding sense in these ways, its core meaning, its place in networks, and its mental grasp, we get a clearer picture of how meaning operates within language and how we, as speakers and listeners, interpret it. Let's take a closer look at the Fregean distinction. It all starts with the theoretical origins, which were clearly demonstrated by Gottlob Frege back in 1892. He used this distinction to help solve some tricky puzzles about identity. Now, one of the key puzzles is what we call the identity puzzle. Imagine this. If meaning were just about reference, then the statement, "The morning star is the morning star," and "the morning star is the evening star" would mean exactly the same thing. But intuitively, the second sentence feels more informative because it reveals that two names refer to the same object, the planet Venus, which we didn't know just from the first. This brings us to Frege's mode of presentation. He argued that while both morning star and evening star refer to the same thing, the planet Venus, they have different senses. Think of senses as different modes of presentation of the same object. That's why the sentences can differ in informativeness even though they point to the same planet. And this idea extends beyond just names to sentences themselves. Frege proposed that the sense of a sentence is the thought it expresses, while the reference is its truth value, whether it's true or false. So, in the bigger picture, this distinction helps us understand how language can carry different levels of meaning, and how we can have meaningful statements about the same object in different ways. It's a foundational idea that influences how we think about meaning and reference in philosophy and linguistics. Now, let's explore the interplay between sense and reference. First, sense determines reference. This means that a speaker's understanding of a word's sense provides the criteria to identify its extension and correct reference. In other words, our grasp of what a word means guides us in selecting the right objects or people it refers to. Next, consider that one referent can have multiple senses. For example, someone might refer to the same person as Anwar el-Sadat or as the President of Egypt. Even though the referent is the same, the senses differ depending on the context or the way we describe them. Moving on, it's important to recognize that successful reference doesn't always mean the speaker is technically correct. A speaker might successfully refer to an object, say, calling a plastic bag the bin, and the listener understands what is meant, even if it's not the precise or standard sense of bin. This highlights that successful reference is about the intention and understanding, not just strict correctness. Finally, successful reference is fundamentally a collaborative act. It involves the speaker's intention to identify something clearly, and the hearer's recognition of that intention. This collaboration ensures effective communication even when senses or references aren't perfectly aligned. All of these points together emphasize how sense, reference, and mutual understanding work hand in hand in language, tying back to the overall theme of how meaning is constructed and shared.